Joining us now, also in New Hampshire, is the former chair of the New Hampshire Republican Party, Jennifer Horn. Jennifer, we are so happy to have you here. You are one of the experts, if you will, on all things New Hampshire when it comes to politics. What is your take on this primary process, how it's unfolding? And do you think there's anything Nikki Haley can do between now and Tuesday to put herself in a better light so voters come out and cast their ballots for her? You know, New Hampshire voters, some of y'all like to wait until the very last moment to make your decision.
Well, a lot of New Hampshire voters do like to wait until the last moment to make their decision, but the tracking poll that you've just quoted a few minutes ago coming out of Suffolk University is showing that folks are making their decision. You know, Trump, each day for the past several days, Trump goes up a point or two and Nikki goes up a point or two. It's sad for Ron DeSantis, who seems to be, staying static at 5 or 6% there. But I think they are making their decisions, and we're seeing that. But, the sad thing, I guess, or the biggest, most challenging thing for Nikki Haley, it's not just that she can't get a message out there that's strong enough to overcome Donald Trump. It's that the voters who do support her, their enthusiasm is very low. The same poll that you just quoted shows that 90% of the people who chose Donald Trump for their first choice are choosing him for him, not as a vote against someone else. Whereas 46% of the folks who are voting for Nikki Haley are choosing her for a vote against Trump rather than a vote for her. That's an indication of low enthusiasm. And, she just hasn't done anything particularly bold or particularly aggressive to change those numbers.
Madam Chairwoman, the interesting thing about New Hampshire is, the independent vote. We understand that. But the reality of voting in the process remains the same. You've got to bring together the energy, as you just referenced. You've got to have people who want you in the job. They're prepared to go there. And you also have your friends help you. Your friends come and they're there for you, particularly when you have partnered with them in the past. Let's say you're the governor of a state and they're the congressman that you elevate to the United States Senate when there's a vacancy. I'd like to have you listen to Tim Scott about how he sees this presidential race.
We need a president today who will stop the crime and recklessness in the streets. We need a president who will restore law and order. We need Donald Trump.
So, Madam Chair, when that's your friend, how do you expect to come? How does that resonate in New Hampshire? I had one person up in New Hampshire say to me, "Well, at least he did it, now as opposed to, the day of the primary." The reality of it is, it doesn't matter when you do it.
Right.
There is an impact. How do you read this moment for Nikki in New Hampshire, but more broadly in this presidential bid that she's trying to make?
Well, that certainly doesn't help her in New Hampshire. Now, I would suggest that Senator Scott probably doesn't really bring a lot of Granite State voters to the table with this endorsement, but it certainly has the impact of slowing down whatever momentum she's trying so hard to build up there. When I look at that, Scott, and by the way, the old saying, when you have friends like these, nice guy to do what he did when he did. But look at it from Tim Scott's perspective. Is he now on a list to be considered for vice president for the ticket? He might not have a lot of impact in New Hampshire, but getting his voice in early, one, puts him in a great position with the eventual nominee, because I think we all know Donald Trump is going to be the eventual nominee here. But from Trump's perspective, where does Tim Scott have influence? In South Carolina, in Nikki Haley's home state, in the next state in this primary cycle. So, that's where he's going to be the most valuable to Trump, and that's where his value to Trump will translate into Trump, kind of seeing him as somebody to take a close look at. It's really disappointing, I guess I will say. I really question what Tim Scott could possibly be thinking personally, when we know what his history is, when we know what his background is, when we know that he's one of the people who has spoken out against Trump when Trump has faced his worst moments during his presidency. But like so many others, expect the others. The dominoes will continue to fall after Tuesday.
It takes a lot of chutzpah to call someone who engaged in insurrection a candidate who supports law and order. Let's talk about one of the names that has not been much mentioned, and that is Ron DeSantis. This from Tara Palmieri. Despite having spent several days in the state this week, she's talking about New Hampshire, I have struggled to find a single DeSantis supporter. Voters I've talked to here do not care for his 6-week abortion ban or his culture warring with Disney and Florida's school librarians. He's now talking about the possibility of a win in the U.S. Virgin Islands. I've never been, always wanted to go, not necessarily seen as a big stop on the presidential nominating train.
Yeah, well, I'm with Michael. Never been, would love to go. However, for Ron DeSantis, he just said a couple days ago that he's got enough money to stay in the race until the end of March, which puts him, past Super Tuesday. And any purpose he could possibly have left for staying in the race is simply to be there just in case, to still be, out there on the trail just in case something blows up on Donald Trump. But as we've seen exit polls in Iowa and a lot of other polls that are taking place in other parts of the country, the Republicans are with Trump no matter what. He could get convicted and sent to jail, and they're saying they're still with him. They think even if he's convicted of any of these crimes that he's facing, any of these trials that he's facing, that he will still be qualified to be president of the United States and to lead our country. So to me, the only thing Ron DeSantis is really doing right now is kind of draining down the account before he closes it out altogether.
If he wanted to drain the swamp, here he is draining the account. Jennifer Horn, thank you so much.